Para entrevistar a ex-primeira-ministra da Noruega, convidamos Darlene Menconi, editora de Ciência, Tecnologia e Meio Ambiente da revista Isto É, Júlio Abranchic, médico e redator da Folha de São Paulo, Vicente Adorno, editor de Internacional da TV Cultura, Liana John, editora executiva da revista Terra da Gente, José Goldenberg, físico e secretário estadual do Meio Ambiente, Miriam Duailib, coordenadora da ONG Instituto Ecoar para a Cidadania, especialista em educação para a sustentabilidade, e Fábio Feldman, secretário executivo do Fórum Paulista de Mudanças Climáticas Globais e Biodiversidade. Temos também a participação do cartunista Paulo Caruso, que vai registrar em seus desenhos os momentos e flagrantes do programa. O Roda Viva é transmitido em rede nacional de TV para todo o Brasil. Como o programa de hoje é gravado, não será possível a participação dos telespectadores com perguntas e sugestões. Boa noite, ministra. Minha primeira pergunta é a seguinte: como que a senhora define a expressão desenvolvimento sustentável, que a senhora trouxe a público praticamente em todo o mundo?
Well, it's really quite simple in its complexity,
Yes.
but saying that sustainable development is a pattern of development that takes care of the needs of present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
Então, no seu conceito de desenvolvimento sustentável, nesse que a senhora apresentou, o futuro é que é a questão.
Yes, it is. It really is the fact that we are the first generations on this earth that have to face the fact that we can fundamentally change the options for future generations. And it's an intergenerational responsibility that we are facing.
E nesses 25, 30 anos que a senhora acompanha essa questão, como a senhora acha que o desenvolvimento sustentável se desenvolveu, vamos dizer?
Well, I think basically big parts of the scientific community and even the political community around the world have become aware of the realities of the problems we are facing. And that is a major increase in awareness. But the ability to do what is necessary to make the changes we need to do is not always at that level.
Ministra, depois que o conceito, ou pelo menos a expressão desenvolvimento sustentável, se tornou mais comum, em alguns mercados, parece que ele tem sido usado como um disfarce para barreiras comerciais. A senhora acha que isso está acontecendo e de que maneira nós poderemos evitar que continuasse a acontecer?
You mean that environmental concerns are being used and misused?
Exatamente. Às vezes, nas negociações entre países, se usa a desculpa do ambientalmente correto, tal produto não é ambientalmente correto e, no entanto, isso é, na verdade, uma desculpa para criar uma barreira ou manter uma barreira comercial entre países.
Well, I think this has happened. However, we also face the problem that products that are environmentally damaging or negative are not covered or picked up by the framework and the rules of trade. So you have two problems. You have to take this into consideration. But sometimes countries can misuse it. But, you know, this really shows that you have to debate the reality of the accusation of whatever is addressed as an environmental concern. You have to have a scientific basis on which to judge whether it's correct or not. It should not be politicized and misused, in my view.
Ministra, eu gostaria de saber da senhora sobre a cooperação internacional. Nós estávamos discutindo antes de começar o programa sobre isso. A cooperação internacional tem focado bastante na questão do capital social dos países, do capital ambiental dos países, até na hora dos empreendimentos, na hora de dar esses financiamentos. O quanto a senhora acha que isso é efetivo e o quanto é retórico? Eu gostaria de saber a sua opinião.
As an example, are you thinking about grants in development aid or
Exatamente.
grants from or loans from the World Bank and so on?
Exatamente.
Yeah. So we do face some of the same problem that the previous question addressed. There has to be concern about the environment and about sustainable development patterns when you invest everywhere. And if loans are given or grants are given, they have to pass those kinds of tests of whether it is a long-term good investment from for a sustainable development perspective or not. So then the question is, how good are our institutions to do the right thing? On those institutions, you have representatives of different kinds of governments, and you have a secretariat usually that analyzes. The question is, how well is it done, and do we have sufficient accountability, and do we have sufficient insight from civil society, from NGOs, to see whether what is done is in fact well done. Otherwise, it needs to be criticized and changed.
Ministra, a senhora falou em padrões. Quem ou o que, ou existe alguma instituição que hoje tenha autoridade para impor um determinado tipo de padrão que deva ser seguido em qualquer lugar do mundo, em qualquer continente, em qualquer circunstância, ou eles são avaliados de acordo com cada país, com cada continente?
You know, we don't have standards in many areas because we are still historically in a situation where governments are the building block of the international society, countries, and their collaboration is decisive for what kind of level of cooperation happens. So there are treaties in social or environmental fields, in health field, but they are relatively few. So basically, we are dependent upon governments and their accountability, because even if they sign declarations and soft law, like you can do in institutions like the General Assembly or ILO or WHO, you know, recommendations, resolutions, they don't have a law-abiding force. But there are treaties, like, for example, the Tobacco Convention, which we made in WHO to finish 2 years ago, where Brazil was very active, and your foreign minister, in fact, was the negotiator with me in the early stages. That's a treaty which really gives countries commitments. You have it in the Kyoto Protocol, where countries are committed. But unless they have ratified, they are not committed. So international law is still not solid enough to do what is necessary.
E também não existe quem faça, digamos, uma monitoração. Quem ratificou, quem assinou, está cumprindo realmente isso. Não é verdade?
Well, I mean, in every serious international treaty, there is a monitoring mechanism. There has to be. So, for instance, in this Tobacco Convention that I know well, because we negotiated it in WHO, as now this has entered into force, and as the meetings of the parties are gathered together, there is a monitoring mechanism. You know, papers are made that show what different countries have done in tobacco legislation in doing what they are obliged to do. You have the same as the Kyoto Protocol starts working, there will be monitoring of what countries have done. They have to report, and there has to be a debate about what has happened. So this is the only way we can move forward, really. You need surveillance and monitoring, as you say.
Ministra, 1/6 da população mundial vive ainda hoje com menos de $1 por dia. E, ao mesmo tempo, com exceção talvez do seu país, a Noruega, os países desenvolvidos não destinaram a verba que se comprometeram para reduzir a pobreza, a mortalidade infantil. É possível reverter esse quadro perverso, na sua opinião?
You know, I've been working hard on this for the last 25 or 30 years, and I really agree with you, it's a fundamental question. It was a tragic thing to observe that after our report in 87, then Rio 92, in the coming years, although Agenda 21 and the Rio declarations called for increased development cooperation and development aid as part of building up Agenda 21, taking care of a number of the poor countries' situation. There was no increase on the average, but rather gradually in the 90s, a decrease in development assistance. We can go up and down and debate why did this happen. It's a tragedy anyway. But when I came to WHO in '98, and my role was to really bring up the health issues globally, which are linked to poverty as well. I then saw that at the Monterrey meeting in Mexico, where commitments were made from the rostrum by prime ministers and finance ministers, the things started to turn. So after Monterrey, there has been, while the curve was going down, it has turned. There is an improvement. And one of the issues, I think the health issues scared people more than maybe environment issues. It shouldn't be, but now there is a turn. Many countries are at least increasing somewhat, but there are countries that only pay 0.15 or under 0.2, while the Nordic countries pay nearly 1%. And, but Ireland, a number of European Union countries are moving now upwards. So it is a commitment that is increasing instead of decreasing, at least.
Ministra, eu queria dizer que a sua vinda ao Brasil exatamente 20 anos atrás foi muito importante, inclusive a senhora mencionou isso, quer dizer, quando a Comissão Brundtland veio a Cubatão, que foi considerado pelo relatório Brundtland uma das cidades mais poluídas do mundo. Nesses 20 anos houve uma grande evolução, inclusive no Brasil. A minha pergunta para a senhora seria a seguinte: quais seriam, na verdade, os pontos em que nós teríamos que atacar nos próximos 20 anos para que, de fato, nós pudéssemos olhar para trás e dizer que nós tivemos sucesso? Quer dizer, as ONGs são mais valorizadas hoje, a sociedade civil é reconhecida, o tema do desenvolvimento sustentável está aí, está colocado, pelo menos nos discursos. O que a senhora recomendaria que fosse feito a nível de sociedade civil, de governos? Quais seriam os pontos cruciais para que, de fato, nós revertêssemos a situação? Talvez o que a senhora falou, a pegada ecológica, o footprint a nível internacional. O que a senhora recomendaria para nós?
I think what we were just discussing about the richer countries stepping up to their responsibility to be contributing much more to the development of poor countries, to make it possible for them to have a sustainable development pattern and to take care of the basic needs of populations. This is very essential. Then, in addition to this, of course, willingness to be able to commit through treaties in the critical areas such as energy. I mean, if we are not able to find solutions to an energy use and an energy mix that is sustainable, we are really in trouble. So it's not just the climate issue, but also the kinds of pollution otherwise that happens from use of energy, and energy is vital. So unless we find the energy mix that is sustainable and that we need alternative energy sources, and we need a great cooperation between countries to find those solutions. You have to really make a number of different mixes depending on the country and depending on, and develop new technologies through research that really makes it possible. I was in a windmill park in Norway just a month ago. And, you know, to me, it's fascinating to see that Norway, with all these waterfalls and the oil and gas, the commitment even of later Norwegian governments now and the parliament has been kept up. We need to participate in finding solutions for energy for Europe, not just thinking Norway, because we have our solutions, which are reasonable, but we can use the vast areas of the Norwegian territory with little people but big area to catch the wind. And you know, you have to do a number of these things, because I really am scared about the energy scenario. So that's another crucial thing with regard to caretaking of the environment. And then you have natural resources of the kind, water, and of course here in Brazil, Amazon, as an example of natural resources that are being undermined. We have the same in other parts of the world, and not sufficient action is taken on behalf of the whole world to try to take care of it, and to help countries like Brazil, Indonesia and others that have those kinds of resources.
Mas na Conferência da África do Sul, que avaliou a Conferência do Rio, de certa maneira nós não conseguimos avançar, inclusive numa proposta muito modesta de iniciativa de energia, de uma meta de 10% de energia renovável. O que eu quero dizer é que a arena internacional, a comunidade internacional tem tido muita dificuldade de avançar concretamente. Inclusive o enforcement é muito difícil. Então, quer dizer, o que me parece é que talvez nós devêssemos tentar algumas fórmulas mais inovadoras, senão nós corremos o risco de daqui a 10, 15 anos estar enfrentando essa mesma situação com a piora nos indicadores sociais de pobreza e ambientais.
Só complementar.
I agree with him. You know, we have a problem. But also in my experience and the realism about the power factors in the world, as we talked about earlier, governments are the building blocks of the global society, and to the extent that NGOs and political forces inside countries and across borders can influence the decision-making of governments and the decision-making of businesses within a country, that's where I think it's democratic decision-making processes that become more long-term, that can make the major difference. Because unless you have more countries with a progressive view about their responsibility for the future, we are in trouble because we have no alternative source of decision-making than our democratically based societies.
Mas, do ponto de vista político, há muita dificuldade nos países. Por exemplo, nos Estados Unidos, o parlamento, o Congresso americano é muito conservador em relação a muitos dos temas, às vezes até mais conservador que os governos. É o caso da questão...
It has to be changed.
E essa que é a minha pergunta. A senhora foi política há muito tempo. Como é que nós fazemos para tratar do campo dos parlamentos e dos governos quando significa um esforço extraordinário de ter uma agenda internacional que impõe restrições em uma agenda doméstica?
Yeah, my bottom line, maybe in a way, is I don't see an alternative decision-making structure to politically elected parliaments and governments. And we have to push our energy, our knowledge, our research, our NGO activities towards those governments and to elect governments that in fact are taking long-term consideration seriously. And because I don't find an alternative to this. We cannot establish dictatorial forces somewhere that decides, because what's the accountability? Nobody's going to listen. I mean, these same governments are going to decide whether they say yes or no to a climate protocol.
Ministra, no bloco anterior, a senhora, no final, mencionou a questão da Amazônia. E falou também sobre a questão de como é que os governos, afinal, tratam a questão ambiental e como é que eles fazem, de fato, os tratados serem praticados ou não. O que eu queria perguntar à senhora é o seguinte: frequentemente, de quando em quando, autoridades internacionais falam em internacionalizar a Amazônia, especialmente quando há notícias a respeito do dano que está sendo causado a essa grande floresta, esse grande ecoambiente. Eu pergunto, a senhora acha que esse é o caminho para evitar a destruição da floresta amazônica?
Well, basically, I believe that the responsible government, which is Brazilian government, and for some parts other neighboring governments, have to take the main responsibility for their own natural resources. But they have to take it, and they have to listen to the scientific evidence about what will happen if they are postponing and being inactive in making a plan which really can protect and preserve. So, internationalization is an interesting word, but as I said earlier, I think it's a good idea for other countries or NGOs or the World Bank, others, to be helping Brazil take the right decisions and make it possible to make a plan that can be long-term sustainable development. And so, but you can never overrule the responsibility of the Brazilian people and the Brazilian government on taking care of their own natural resources.
Mesmo que o cuidado que esteja sendo tomado seja talvez insuficiente, eu não estou diminuindo a complexidade da questão. Acho que a complexidade da questão amazônica para o Brasil é enorme. Mas digamos que há uma falha nessa questão no governo brasileiro. Mesmo assim, a senhora acha que o principal responsável é o governo brasileiro, deve continuar sendo o governo brasileiro?
I don't think there is an alternative. You know, you cannot go to war to take over for the Brazilian government, even if they are doing stupid things, if they are. However, political pressure, trying to convince, trying to support, trying to help, talking about it, criticizing it, I mean, all of this should be done by NGOs and by other nations if they feel that they themselves are doing the best and feel confident that they can do it, you know, with decency. Because really it's a dramatic situation, and, you know, you need to have change to protect for the future.
Professor Rodenberg.
Ministro, o seu relatório Brundtland, Nosso Futuro Comum, acabou sendo uma grande fonte de inspiração para o movimento ambientalista no mundo todo. E eu me lembro muito bem quando a senhora veio aqui em 1985 e obteve depoimento de vários brasileiros, inclusive alguns colegas que estão aqui, e eu inclusive. Um dos problemas que nós tivemos ao longo desses 20 anos em implementar o conceito de desenvolvimento sustentável é que ele foi adotado como retórica dos governos, mas os governos duram 4 anos. E as gerações futuras são várias gerações futuras que podem significar 10 anos, 20 anos, 30 anos, 40 anos. Ou seja, há um descompasso, uma incongruência entre o horizonte de curto tempo, que é o horizonte de governos, e o conceito de desenvolvimento sustentável. E o próprio conceito, como a senhora sabe, foi criticado por não ter sido suficientemente objetivo. Ele fala gerações futuras, mas não fala quais gerações futuras, isto é, ele não estabelece uma escala de tempo. E a senhora deve ter sentido isso nos últimos 20 anos, e houve algum progresso nesse sentido? É possível fazer algum progresso?
You know, I think to discuss the definition is really not a very important thing, because the problem of not following up the analysis and the recommendations in the report and in the Agenda 21 and the Rio Summit results is not in you know, rediscussing the definition. The problem is the lack of commitment and the lack, as you say, of long-term planning and long-term perspective of government. And that is a big challenge to our democracy, because we even now see that in some countries, election participation goes down. People are not participating in the election processes. They are leaning back, feeling outside, or too lazy, depending, you know, you have all the different variants. So our democracies are not lively enough. They are not really actively being pushed by people at large for even the long-term interest of themselves and their family, their children, their grandchildren. So we have a great dilemma, that we have these challenges to humanity, and we are not able to find the ways that can function to make the right types of changes in time. It's a great dilemma. I don't have an answer to it. So I'm looking for science, for NGO, for individuals, I mean generally, to realize that we all have a responsibility to try to make a difference. There is no alternative to democratic participation and to pushing our own representatives to doing the right thing. I don't know of an alternative, a dictatorial, solution. Nobody will agree to some dramatic proposal because the governments in the UN will say no. Whether, if you come up with really wonderful proposals, the same countries are going to decide whether they apply or not. So science, awareness raising, media, people, we have to do it ourselves.
Ministra, qual a
Antes,
sua opinião?
pera só um instantinho. Eu queria só contar aos telespectadores que em 1987 a ministra foi presidente da Comissão Mundial sobre Meio Ambiente e Desenvolvimento das Nações Unidas, quando então foi produzido, ficou conhecida como Comissão Brundtland, e quando então foi produzido o relatório Brundtland, ao qual o Fábio Feldman e o professor Goldenberg se referiram. Darlene.
Qual a sua opinião, ministra, sobre a energia nuclear, que alguns dizem que ambientalmente é menos danosa?
This was one of two issues of all the ones that we debated in the Commission, which was the most difficult one. The other one was family planning, the role of women, and the right to decide the size of your family. For religious reasons, that was a big struggle inside the Commission. On the nuclear energy, we had a hard time coming to it because we agreed, we had a consensus document. So it was a very difficult issue because some people were convinced that nuclear energy has to be part of the solution because it doesn't affect the climate. It has other risks, but still, it has to be part of the mix. Others on the Commission were convinced nuclear energy is too dangerous, we should get rid of it. But we did have a critical remark, that was the kind of common conclusion was that nuclear energy can only become sustainable if the presently unsolved problems of the use and the storage of nuclear fuel has been solved. We said the solutions are not good enough to be called sustainable at this moment. Now, in the next 20 years, I think more people, and today, even in the last years, as the climate scenario becomes more and more dramatic, I think you will find more people saying, we cannot abolish nuclear energy. We have to continue trying to find better solution to what we do with the waste products and the risk profile of, a real tragedy like we had in Chernobyl or in 3 Mile Island and so on. So I would stay with the same conclusion that we made 17 years ago about not saying nuclear energy is not acceptable, but saying it's really not sustainable unless we solve the problems. But neither are the use of fossil fuels, oil, coal. We are using energy types which are not sustainable at the moment. And there are the search for alternatives has to be a major concern.
O álcool é uma solução interessante, na sua opinião? O álcool produzido no Brasil para combustível?
Well, I think, this is part of a broader pattern of different alternatives which altogether can be part of a solution. It is, this type of energy is one in a big puzzle of many alternative sources which can add up to something which doesn't have the same level of damage on the environment.
Júlio.
Doutor
So
Agron,
you have to decide which one.
além dos problemas do futuro, de longo prazo, nós temos alguns problemas atuais na área da migração de cérebros, na área da saúde, por exemplo. Nós estamos às vésperas de uma epidemia, de uma pandemia da gripe aviária e alguns países não contam com o seu pessoal de saúde para enfrentar o problema. O que a Organização Mundial da Saúde tem feito nos últimos anos para impedir a invasão desses cérebros de países pobres para os países ricos. Eles apenas dão dinheiro, mas ficam com os cérebros.
Yeah. Now, you know, you can imagine that this question is a very difficult one. But the WHO has been calling experts and conferences and held meetings focusing on the issue, discussing it with groups of, you know, with nations across the world. What can we do to improve the situation? And basically, bottom line, very few people say we should make it illegal, you know, in real terms, for people who live in a poor country to move to another country where there is higher income and more opportunities to use your research background. You cannot do it.
Os países ricos deveriam fazer com que os que ficam nos países pobres se desenvolvessem em seus próprios países. A Organização Mundial da Saúde poderia contribuir.
I'm saying, in those meetings where the WHO has called people together to analyze the problem that you are raising, one solution that some countries come up with is that you know, it should be made illegal for people to move out of poor countries and take better positions. So that, but most people say impossible.
Yes.
Okay. So we are left in the end with the other type of solution, which is you have to be supporting the poor countries so that the specialists and the training of doctors and nurses, research institutions in those countries can move forward so that people choose to be there and stay there and have higher pay. This is the kind of solution that WHO is advising. And to a certain extent, it is now being more listened to than it was only 5 years ago. People now realize if we are going to try to increase the level of development in health and education in poor countries, we have to be more supportive. We have to do more to make it possible for people to do this on their own territory. And otherwise, as you mentioned the avian flu, if we don't have a public health capacity in all countries, what can we do when a situation like this arises? We had a lot of experience when the SARS epidemic came in 2003, and there has been more understanding in rich countries about these needs since then. And as we are preparing for a potential pandemic in influenza, today more than 100 countries at least have national plans on how to deal with it. But we are far from what is necessary, I'm sorry to say.
O que parece, ministra, é o contrário. Recentemente eu vi um filme que me impressionou muito, que se chama The Constant Gardener. Aqui no Brasil se chamou O Jardineiro Fiel. Eu fui ao cinema achando que se tratava de um thriller, um filme de suspense. E é uma história muito bem elaborada sobre um fato que, se for realmente verdadeiro, eu acho que a gente chegou ao fim do poço. Porque esse filme demonstra que países pobres como a África, isso pegando a observação do professor Júlio, estão sendo usados como laboratório. Os povos da África estão sendo usados como cobaias para testar, inclusive remédios que ainda ninguém sabe se têm determinados efeitos colaterais e se eles são realmente eficientes para combater esses tipos de epidemias que estão aparecendo. Então eu pergunto, não estaria embutido nisso tudo muito mais uma questão de lucro? Os grandes laboratórios querem, sim, eles querem que haja um esforço nesse sentido, mas eles estão visando muito mais ao lucro do que a saúde pública realmente.
Well, I think this is another question than the one I discussed with the previous questions. And I have read the book, The Constant Gardener. And it's it gives a dramatic scenario that could be true, at least, in some cases. But I would warn people to believe that this is the general picture of what's happening. Because frankly, there are ethical rules that are developed. Most researchers who work in developing countries and who have their base in rich countries follow these ethical rules. But it is a dramatic picture of what can happen if you don't control things and if you don't work seriously with governments so that they help implement standards in their own institutions to avoid this thing happening. But you are more focused, I think, now on the industry side of it, that yes, there are pharmaceutical companies who have great profits. There are many companies in different areas that have great profits. And it's often very unreasonable. So then you enter into the question of intellectual property rights. How can we get lower prices for medicines that are essential, vaccines, all the things that poor people need have to be much lower priced so that they can be applied, not only available in the rich countries, but available to the poor countries, which is why we made a global fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, where now, you know, when I go back to 1997, the year before I came to WHO, there was spent globally $250 million on AIDS. This year, $8 billion are going to be spent on AIDS. There is a dramatic change in how the world deals now with some of these major infectious disease threats. There has been a real move forward, at least on some of these issues, I'm glad to say.
A senhora concorda que, por exemplo, o modelo usado no Brasil de se partir para a fabricação de alimentos, de medicamentos genéricos, não é uma boa solução, mas é evidente que a indústria farmacêutica não gosta muito disso.
Yeah, it has been a good solution for Brazil, and it can be and has been a good solution in some other countries also. And the fact that Brazil has done it has pushed some of the other countries and the big companies to realize that if they are unreasonable, you know, this kind of action will be taken. So it has helped WHO and others who are working to try to increase access to vital medications to poor countries and poor peoples.
Ministra, no bloco anterior nós começamos a falar sobre esse assunto de saúde, indústria farmacêutica, etc. Como o diretor-geral da Organização Mundial de Saúde, me parece, é considerado uma espécie de ministro da saúde do mundo. Deveria ter um papel como esse, quer dizer quais são quais devem ser as grandes políticas, quais são as preocupações, como deve ser conduzida a questão da saúde no mundo. Eu queria perguntar se a senhora concorda com esse entendimento do cargo de diretor-geral da Organização Mundial de Saúde, perguntar se a senhora acha que a Organização Mundial de Saúde faz o papel que cabe a ele e perguntar também por que a senhora abandonou, por que a senhora decidiu não concorrer a um segundo mandato, que causou na época um grande espanto na comunidade de saúde internacional.
Eu gostaria de acrescentar mais uma pergunta. O que é mais difícil, ser primeiro-ministro ou diretora da OMS?
Então a senhora vê que a senhora tem 4 perguntas.
Well, so, several questions, yeah. Well, first of all, of course you can simplify and you can idolize in a sense and say that the World Health Organization is the health ministry of the world. But, and to a certain extent, one tries to fill that kind of role within the limits that are set by the fact that this is an intergovernmental organization with 192 member states who decide the budget, who decide basically any major action to be made. But of course, as long as you build on scientific evidence, as long as you really keep to being an advocate and a spokesperson of what works, have the evidence in your mind and speak out on that evidence about what's needed around the world on health, you can be listened to and therefore have an influence. But with regard to implementation, you have very little basis to do so. Because again, governments deal with their health services. And if they don't deal with them or deal with them badly, nobody can come in and take over. What you can do is say, can you receive some help? Can we have donors try to help you? The WHO has no budget to go in and do anything, except, like basic laboratory capacity in some cases, to be able to identify avian flu, for example, to help countries do that. However, now then, so that's the situation. But it's an important organization because the recommendations made are listened to by NGOs, are listened to by governments, and the collaboration between countries improves because the World Health Organization is there to make it happen. Then, so why did I not take a second term?
Yes.
Because at that time I knew I was already 64, I was going to 64. I had been working in high-level, top-level positions in my own country and internationally continuously for 30 years. I felt I was going to be 69 before I had finished a second term. And I just think that's not right. And I've said this, you know, to some men, because they didn't understand. Everybody wanted me to stay. Why did you leave, Gro? And I told them exactly what I said to you now. And they said, well, you know, I would have stayed. And, you know, well, you're a man. You know, most men don't ever see the limitation. They continue until they, you know, die from heart infarction or something. Because they are used to having their identity completely combined with their professional life. I think women more than men are able to see that life also has some other aspects. And that in fact, as you get older, you may not be as effective as when you were 60, when you are 70. So that was the basis.
Então
Now,
não
what
foi.
was the third question?
Então, desculpe, ministra. Deixa eu só.
difícil?
Deixa eu
Oh,
só
what
fazer
was
isso.
most difficult?
Yes.
Being prime minister or
Yeah.
about the same. The challenge coming from everywhere, and you have to try to keep your mind straight and your eyes, you know, in the horizon and see that you're doing the right thing. It's the same challenge, really.
Então não foi a sua decisão de sair. Então não foi uma insatisfação com o papel da Organização Mundial de Saúde, com o que a senhora conseguiu efetivamente fazer.
No, because I didn't believe, frankly, that anyone else could do it better. It was not because I felt I wasn't doing the maximum I could, and to push even the organization upward in people's perspective.
Okay.
But I knew that I was getting older and I should leave in time.
Ok.
Yeah.
Liana.
Eu gostaria de voltar para a questão ambiental. A Noruega tem sido um dos países que, alinhados com o Japão, em defesa, na pressão para a volta à caça às baleias. E eu gostaria de saber, primeiro, se a senhora não considera essa indústria baleeira altamente insustentável. E segundo, se o turismo de observação de baleias não seria muito mais sustentável do que a caça, com a vantagem de manter as baleias vivas.
You know, I don't agree. I mean, Norway would never have had the policy in my time or now that we believe that a small catch of the minke whale, which is in the North Atlantic, should be done for sustainable reasons. There is fish in the ocean. There are many important fish stocks. And the whale, the balance in the ocean is such that if you leave the minke whale because somebody thinks that whales are different from all other animals, you are not doing a sustainable biological evaluation. You can have small catches, you should have, because we don't want the minke whale to, you know, to just grow and grow and grow with no catch at all. It's not good practices of ocean management. I'm not taking on the burden of protecting everything that Japan has done with whaling. I am saying to you that what Norway has done during the time that I have been politically active has not been any reason to criticize. We have done sustainable development evaluation, always based on the scientific evidence. But that has not been always understood because you have had an activist scenario built on the fact that all of us were, you know, historically undermining many of the whales which have been extinct. And the whole tragedy of having done that has led to a kind of protect every whale wherever it is, whatever type. And that's not the right scenario for the future, you see.
Na verdade, a Noruega se baseia só apenas no, vamos dizer assim, no levantamento da população, que seria excedente, na sua opinião, de baleias mink e não de todas as baleias. Quer dizer, não seria muito mais
only the minke whale, only very small catches. And according to the treaty, we have followed the treaty from the beginning. We have taken the scientific basis. We have told the Whaling Commission that we make exception to certain decisions that were made. I said when I was Prime Minister, we will follow the moratorium. We will agree with the moratorium for a number of years. But then when the scientific evidence is analyzed by everybody, if it still shows that we should be catching a small number of minke whales, we will insist that scientific evidence is the basis, not politicization, that whales are different from every other animal. They are not. We should protect all species and not pick one and say that they are different from everybody else.
Em relação ao turismo de observação, não seria muito mais sustentável do que a caça?
That's fine. No.
Não seria mais...
There is no either
Não
or.
são conflitantes, na
No,
sua
I
opinião?
don't understand the question. We have this whale tourism in Norway already.
Na
Because we
verdade,
have other whale types that are very close to the coast, where you can take people out and watch them, and this is part of what we are doing. That's fine. But that is no argument that we shouldn't have a sustainable catch pattern for the minke whale, which is abundant in the North Sea.
Miriam.
Ministra,
Yeah.
aqui. Ministra, eu queria voltar ao tema da sustentabilidade, que na verdade engloba tudo o que foi falado aqui. Para nós que somos ambientalistas, que somos educadores ambientais, temos a impressão às vezes de que nós estamos vivendo uma época em que dois paradigmas acontecem ao mesmo tempo no mundo. Em um deles existe uma sociedade civil que se organizou e que conseguiu fazer com que os governos, as políticas públicas e as próprias empresas avançassem em direção a um padrão de maior sustentabilidade, no que se refere à produção de tecnologia, de produtos tecnológicos, até mesmo na questão agrícola, na questão de novas energias alternativas, não é? Como o carro híbrido, que está aí, que está já no mercado, etc. e tal. Por outro lado, a gente vê que existe um outro paradigma que está aí, que às vezes parece estar recrudescendo, se tornando mais forte, não é? Que esse paradigma do lucro imediato, do poder muito forte de determinados governos de interferirem no andamento do mundo todo, do planeta todo, e me dá a impressão de que este modelo, este velho paradigma do lucro imediato, da destruição ambiental, do não cuidado com os pobres, etc., às vezes me parece que ele está num momento de franco crescimento e que pode se agravar muito com a entrada da China, com seu 1 bilhão de potenciais consumidores nesse mercado. Então, isso faz com que a gente fique muito preocupado com a questão da sustentabilidade. Como é que vai ser isso com a entrada da China no mercado por meio deste velho paradigma não sustentável?
Well, China, of course, is a large continent and contributes a lot to the global picture, more and more as the population has increased, and of course, as they move forward technologically and with regard to economic development, with an 8 to 9% growth every year, much of it's unsustainable patterns of growth. It's a dramatic potential scenario. So we really need to work with China to help China develop better patterns of development, which we already said in 1987 in the report, and which is part of the advice coming out of the Rio summit as well as the Johannesburg summit, that kind of thinking. We need to see that technology in developing economies are cleaner and better than the ones we used in the richer countries as we were polluting the world. So then the question is, what will China's leaders and China's population do? There are some positive signs. The leader of China has announced that now new criteria will be developed as they judge the leaders of the provinces and the different entities of the big country China. They have been measured according to economic growth only. How high has economic growth been in your part? And there's been no qualification, no quality criteria. Now they have said they will, in the next 5 years, develop a completely new system, including environmental considerations, which the economists of the rich world have told me and everybody else that it's impossible to make a GDP with a real incorporation of the environmental perspective. Now, who knows if China can do it or not? But the fact that they have put this on the agenda and that people have been warned that health issues like SARS, people were fired because they were concealing the reality of SARS by their leaders. Now they may be fired because they have not taken environmental considerations. So, you know, there are some positive trends. I have some hope that things are starting to happen which can help.
Ultimamente, o assunto mudança climática e aquecimento global ficou muito comentado a partir do furacão Katrina, etc. E desse crescente cuidado com a questão ambiental que a senhora falou no começo do programa. Do que está sendo dito como evidência do aquecimento global é o derretimento do Ártico, do Polo Norte. Um dos países, pelo que eu li na imprensa internacional, que poderá ser beneficiado, na verdade, pelo derretimento do Ártico é o seu país, por o fato da Noruega passar a ter mar territorial, mais espaço de mar territorial ali. Eu queria entender o seguinte, em primeiro lugar, existem, pelo que eu entendo, grandes campos de petróleo e gás natural nessa região que a Noruega está ativamente tentando explorar. A possibilidade de explorar me parece que crescerá com o derretimento do Ártico. Então a minha questão é a seguinte, nessas mudanças que estão acontecendo no planeta, só há espaço para catástrofe ou também pode haver oportunidades e mudanças e coisas que afinal podem vir a se tornar positivas, como essa que talvez esteja acontecendo na Noruega, não sei o que a senhora acha.
Well, we certainly don't look upon it as a positive development or an opportunity. We are really scared in my country about climate change, about global warming, and the fact that the Arctic is melting. It's true, and it's dangerous. We see it as a negative.
Okay.
And the biological system of the Arctic is being undermined.
Yes.
So we are really seeing it as dramatically negative. And by the way, you know, when we really have a lot of climate changes, in the worst case, you can even see what we call the Gulf Stream. If it changes its pattern because of all these instabilities, you could have a freezing of the Norwegian coast and really undermining of the whole climate in Norway, because the Gulf Stream crosses the Atlantic from the eastern coast of the United States, goes over and warms the water of the North Sea, so that Norway is habitable. And all of this could be really dramatically negatively changed. So we see it as really negative. And I think even globally, I think we must realize there is very little positives, it's negatives. And the rise of the sea level will be dramatic in so many island and coastal states around the world. It's just bad.
Tá bom. Professor Gondeberg.
Ministro, uma das consequências positivas do relatório Brundtland foi a conferência de 1992, a conferência sobre a Convenção do Clima, que acabou dando origem ao Protocolo de Kyoto. Nós agora temos, dentro de poucas semanas, uma das reuniões dos membros da Convenção do Clima e do Protocolo de Kyoto, que é a Conferência de Montreal. A senhora acha que vai ser possível, na Conferência de Montreal, tornar mais efetivas as ações propostas para reduzir as emissões de gases que provocam o efeito estufa?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I think more people than ever before are now aware that they cannot try to use scientific arguments against the reality of what the International Panel on Climate Change is saying. I mean, the American Academy of Science have been very straight, I think, saying that there is a result here of human change and that we have added to the climate changes that we are seeing. And so even that academic institution, which is taken seriously by many, is saying it. So some of the politicians are standing back and are too slow in realizing, but there is also a debate going on, I think, inside the US Congress between the parties about this scenario, and I'm sure that Katrina has added some more arguments for those who are fighting to have a change in the US position. But even the other countries that have already ratified, they are moving forward. And just a few weeks ago, something called Nord Pool in Norway started being able to trade, the trading system for Europe. And it was clear that as it started up, many people had been waiting to start using the system, part of the system of the Kyoto Protocol. So although the US is standing back, the European countries are moving forward and taking their commitment seriously.
Fábio.
Ministra, sobre isso, sou eu aqui. Eu queria que a senhora falasse um pouco, a senhora mencionou no seu discurso na AmCham sobre o ecological footprint e a pegada ecológica. Eu vejo ela com muito interesse, porque você pode trabalhar isso tanto no nível dos países, quanto das empresas, quanto dos indivíduos. Porque aqui no Brasil existe uma realidade estranha, quer dizer, nós que estamos nessa sala consumimos como provavelmente os noruegueses consomem, enquanto parte da população não consome nada. A senhora vê a possibilidade dessa métrica vir a ser utilizada internacionalmente? Estou mencionando isso porque o professor Goldenberg falou na reunião de Montreal e começa a grande discussão do compromisso de países como a China, Índia e Brasil. Talvez não pudesse ecological footprint ser uma métrica interessante?
Yes. I think so. I do think that kind of thinking needs to be, understood and gradually introduced in such a way that, but again, we need to have sufficient numbers of countries willing to take it on board and to start arguing for it and using it. But it is absolutely something that can help.
Eu acho que a gente perdeu o sentido de urgência nessas discussões, porque me parece que assim, há 20 anos atrás, as questões ambientais soavam, ou ao menos a gente divulgava na mídia, com mais urgentes do que hoje. Hoje parece que é tudo sempre negociações longas. O planeta tem esse tempo?
Well, as I said, I don't see an alternative. The planet is going to be dependent on what humanity does. But you are right. I mean, as long as the media and many circles were really understanding a new issue and understanding that there was some dramatic challenges, the urgency was clearer on people's minds maybe. Mm-hmm. And it led to, for instance, the Montreal Protocol being agreed, quickly. But that was also because industry was ready to make the change. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, the drama and the urgency led to certain steps. Mm-hmm. And then, as some things are seemingly solved, other issues come on to the attention of politicians, and they move from this to terrorism or to other issues, and the relative weight of the drama can be, too much reduced and get to be normalized. Mm-hmm. But we are in a situation where we cannot really afford to normalize the drama that is before our eyes, because it still is as urgent, at least, as back in 92. You're right.
Ministra, como é que a senhora avalia a política ambiental do governo Lula e de que maneira essa seca na Amazônia é uma amostra do que está por vir aí nessa crise do século, que seria a falta de água potável?
You know what? I don't know enough about the policy of the Lula government to be able to give you a reasonable answer. So I'm afraid to enter into uncharted waters here.
Eu poderia dizer à senhora que os índices de desmatamento da Amazônia foram recordes, ano a ano, são crescentes. Yes. Isso já é um sinal. Como a senhora avalia isso?
No, so it means that over the years, insufficient action has been taken to change the risks involved and the potential for greater protection of natural resources. But I cannot place, the Lula and other governments into a context. That's my problem. I don't want to do that without knowing exactly what has happened and what initiatives are taken, by whom and when.
Mas eu acho que aí a gente volta para aquela questão. Quem que vai dizer o quanto já foi feito ou o quanto precisa ser feito? Não existe, eu acho que não existe uma possibilidade de monitoração assim tão precisa em escala mundial que a gente possa dizer, tá bom, vocês estão nos acusando de desmatar a Amazônia, mas na Tailândia também estão desmatando, nas Filipinas também. Então aí vai se tratar daquela coisa que não tem pecado, atire a primeira pedra?
But yeah, I know. But if I had, a kind of full picture, if I had really now the last months updated myself on everything with regard to the Amazon, everything with regard to consecutive government initiatives in Brazil, I could have had a personal opinion. But I don't have that basis. That's what I'm saying.
Ministra, o protocolo de Kyoto prevê relatórios dos países, das comunicações nacionais sobre emissões. O Brasil fez a dele, acho que o ano passado.
Mas só em relação ao período de 94 90.
Então, mas esses relatórios, por exemplo, essas comunicações nacionais que os países são, os países do anexo 1, quer dizer, os que vão ter limites, são obrigados a fazer periodicamente, os países que não são que não estão limitados são obrigados podem fazer menos periodicamente. Esses relatórios são uma forma de monitoramento com a qual o Vicente está tão preocupado, uma forma de controlar os países e controlar a emissão e, enfim, implementar efetivamente o cumprimento dos acordos?
Well, I certainly believe that reports are necessary and that I'm sure that there are NGOs and research institutions that look into, whether those reports are seriously made or not. So we have, after all, transparency and an open public debate about it. But that is necessary, whatever country and whatever report, there has to be a public arena that you can analyze and criticize if necessary. Otherwise, we will not have a monitoring that works.
Qual a senhora acha que é hoje essa arena pública?
You.
Sim. A mídia.
For instance. Well, but not only you, but everybody. I mean,
porque a mídia não...
So it's the transparency of the reports that are being transmitted from governments can be read by everybody. And they can look at whether they are seriously made or whether they are in some way skewed or, imbalanced. And there can be a public debate about whether it was correctly given or not. This applies to, I'm talking in general terms, not only to Kyoto, but to many issues of, for instance, in the human rights area. You have the institution in Geneva, governments are reporting, you have committees put together with experts who are criticizing and questioning the government representative about the content of their reports. So, we have a system which is transparent and where you can make arguments.
Mônica, posso responder ao Adorno? Adorno, o Brasil hoje é o quarto emissor mundial de gases que provocam efeito estufa. Ele está logo depois dos Estados Unidos, da China, da Rússia, e aí vem o Brasil, por causa da floresta amazônica. Esse é um dado concreto, é o dado de 2004. De modo que esses são indicadores muito importantes. Eu acho que a ministra tem toda a razão. O fórum somos nós, são a mídia, os intelectuais, as universidades. Porque governos, eu até pertenço a um governo, governos têm uma tendência de tentar embelezar o que eles fazem. E os dados concretos são transparentes e podem ser lidos por todo mundo.
Nós estamos chegando ao fim do programa. Antes de encerrar, eu queria fazer uma pergunta e peço que a senhora responda brevemente, sobre a condição de mulher. A senhora foi, talvez, uma das primeiras mulheres a alcançar postos tão importantes no mundo e ter tido um papel tão marcante na história recente da humanidade. Como é que a senhora se sente como mulher e o que a senhora acha que mudou nesse seu período?
About the roles of women, you mean? Yeah, well, I mean, when I was a young person in my own country, I saw the difference in the treatment of men and women, even in an advanced society, democratically and everything as Norway. I'm sure it's even worse here. I have in fact talked with people here who say that you have a much bigger macho problem in this country. But I have seen the change happening since I was young until now in my own country and also in many other parts of the world. The argument about women in poor countries is really solidly placed on the agenda. So I see a positive trend. And I have myself felt that in my own country, I have seen the balance between the rights and opportunities of men and women move forward and improved.
Muito obrigada, ministra. O Roda Viva, então, vai chegando ao final. Agradecemos a presença da ministra, da bancada de entrevistadores. Agradecemos também a colaboração e a atenção, a audiência dos senhores. Lembramos que o Roda Viva estará de volta na próxima segunda-feira, às 10h30 da noite. Até lá e uma ótima semana a todos.